Chapter 1. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins of white light, illuminating the rolling clouds that churned like the seas of an angry god. The rumble of thunder that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle, reverberating through the stone walls and causing tapestries to flutter. Teresa jolted awake, her heart pounding in sync with the storm outside. She lay still for a moment, her breaths shallow and rapid, before pushing herself upright. The bedchamber was large and opulently decorated, befitting her status as the king's daughter. Heavy drapes of deep crimson framed tall windows, though they were now drawn to keep out the chill of the storm. Richly woven carpets covered the stone floor, their intricate patterns barely visible in the dim light of the dying fire in the hearth. Teresa rose, the cool air causing her skin to prickle, and she crossed the room with a fluid grace, her long silver hair cascading down her back like a river of moonlight. As she moved towards the balcony, her hips swayed with an unconscious sensuality, and her breasts, full and heavy, bounced lightly with each step. She paused at the glass doors, pushing them open to let the storm's fury wash over her. The rain was a rare blessing in this arid land, and Teresa stood, naked and unashamed, as the cool drops mingled with the heat of her skin. Her eyes, a striking shade of emerald, fixed on the sky where a blood-red moon hung ominously among the clouds, casting a ghastly hue over the stormy landscape. From her vantage point, Teresa could see the sprawling city that clung to the sides of the desert mountain. The streets, usually dusty and parched, were now a morass of mud as the rainwater pooled in the low places, turning the city into a quagmire. The storm was both a blessing and a curse. It brought much-needed water to the people, but it also threatened to wash away the tenuous hold they had on the land. She tried to remember the dream that had been so vivid just moments before, but was now slipping away like sand through her fingers. It had been a dream of fire and blood, of a throne made of bones and a crown of thorns. As she struggled to grasp the remnants of the vision, her gaze shifted back to the bed where Ryan lay, still asleep, oblivious to the turmoil around him. Ryan was a study in contrasts. Tall and slender, he had an air of fragility about him, enhanced by the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. His hair, a dark cascade of ebony, fell to his shoulders in unruly waves, and his face was shadowed with the stubble of several days' growth. He had once been a vibrant and energetic man, but the years had worn him down, and now he relied on a cane to move about, his movements slow and deliberate. Their marriage had been one of convenience and political necessity, a union designed to strengthen alliances rather than hearts. Despite this, Teresa had tried to fulfill her role as a dutiful wife, but Ryan's perpetual melancholy and ill health had become a source of constant frustration. She loved him in a way, but it was a love tempered by pity and resentment. A sharp knock at the door pulled Teresa from her reverie. She turned, wrapping a thin nightgown around her body as she crossed the room to answer it. Standing in the hallway was Sir Matthew, the eldest of her father's Kingsguard. His face was lined with age and care, his once bright eyes now dulled by years of service and loyalty. "Forgive the intrusion, Princess," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. "Your father has taken a turn for the worse. The healers do not expect him to last the night." Teresa felt a cold hand grip her heart. Her father, King Otto Stormbreaker, had been a towering figure in her life, a warrior king who had spent his life defending their kingdom's borders. The thought of losing him now, when she was on the cusp of inheriting his mantle, was almost too much to bear. "Wake Ryan," she instructed, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We will go to him at once." The castle was a labyrinth of stone corridors and echoing halls, a testament to centuries of history and the blood that had been spilled to maintain it. As they made their way through the dimly lit passages, the sound of the storm outside was a constant companion, a reminder of the chaos that mirrored Teresa's own emotions. Ryan leaned heavily on his cane, his steps slow and measured. Teresa fought the urge to snap at him, to tell him to hurry, but she knew it would do no good. Instead, she focused on the path ahead, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The rain pounded against the windows, the wind howling like a living thing. The flickering torches cast long shadows that danced on the walls, creating a surreal and almost nightmarish atmosphere. Teresa kept her gaze fixed forward, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. When they finally reached the king's chambers, Teresa paused at the door, steeling herself for what lay beyond. Sir Matthew pushed the heavy wooden door open, and they stepped inside. The room was dim, the only light coming from a few flickering candles placed around the bed where her father lay. King Otto was a shadow of his former self. Once a robust and fearsome warrior, he was now gaunt and frail, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His long white hair, once a source of pride, now lay in disarray around his head. His chest and arms were a testament to his life of battle, covered in scars that told the story of his many victories and defeats. Solomon, her uncle, sat by the bedside, his face a mask of grim determination. On the other side of the bed were the twins, Jason and Jasmine. At 18, they were the picture of youthful vitality, their blue eyes and white hair marking them as true heirs of the Stormbreaker line. They watched in silence as the healers worked frantically, their efforts ultimately futile. Teresa clenched her fists, anger and helplessness warring within her. Her father had sacrificed so much for the kingdom, yet here he was, denied the warrior's death he deserved. As the eldest, she knew the responsibility of the realm would soon fall to her, and the weight of it was almost suffocating. Ryan reached out, his hand seeking hers in a gesture of comfort, but Teresa pulled away, her mind too consumed with the implications of her father's impending death to accept his support. The night wore on. The storm outside a relentless backdrop to the somber scene within. As dawn broke, the storm began to abate, leaving the air heavy with the scent of rain and earth. Teresa had not slept. She had spent the night watching her father, her thoughts a tangled web of grief and determination. When King Otto finally breathed his last, the sound was almost imperceptible, a soft exhalation that marked the end of an era. Teresa stood, her body aching from the long vigil. She looked around the room at the gathered family members and attendants, all of whom seemed lost in their own grief. Her gaze lingered on her uncle Solomon, who met her eyes with a look that was both challenging and sympathetic. "It's my realm now," she whispered to herself as she turned and left the room, her red nightgown clinging to her slender figure. The castle was still and silent, the only sound the occasional drip of water from the eaves as the last of the storm drained away. She found herself climbing the steps of the tallest tower, seeking solitude and a place to think. The ascent was long and arduous, but the physical exertion helped to clear her mind. When she finally reached the top, she stepped out onto the small windswept platform and looked out over the vast expanse of desert that stretched to the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving the landscape washed clean and sparkling in the morning sun. The city below was already beginning to stir, the inhabitants emerging to assess the damage and take advantage of the rare abundance of water. Teresa felt a pang of empathy for them. Their lives were hard, and the loss of the king would only add to their burdens. As the bells began to toll, signaling the death of the king, Teresa felt a surge of emotion. She had always known that this day would come, but she had not expected it to feel so hollow, so empty. She had expected to feel a sense of triumph, of destiny fulfilled, but instead, she felt only a deep, aching sadness. "It's my realm now," she repeated, the words a mantra that she hoped would give her strength. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the morning chill, and allowed herself a few moments of quiet reflection. Teresa must have fallen asleep in the tower, for when she awoke, the sun was high in the sky and the heat of the day was already pressing down on her. She felt disoriented and stiff, her body protesting the night spent on the hard stone. She rose slowly, brushing off the dirt and adjusting her nightgown, before making her way back down the tower steps. As she descended, she thought about the day ahead. There would be ceremonies to arrange, dignitaries to inform, and 1,000 other tasks that would require her attention. But first, she needed to speak with her uncle. Solomon had always been a steadying presence in her life, and she needed his counsel now more than ever. She found Solomon in his private study, a room filled with old books and scrolls, the air thick with the smell of parchment and ink. He was sitting at his large wooden desk, writing letters with a quill pen and an ink bottle. The light from the high windows cast a golden glow over the scene, giving it a timeless, almost ethereal quality. Solomon looked up as she entered, his long white hair falling around his shoulders. He wore a red tunic, the color a stark contrast to the paleness of his skin. He smiled slightly, a gesture of welcome that did little to hide the tension in his eyes. "What are you doing?" Teresa asked, her voice betraying her fatigue and frustration. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the parchment on the desk. She recognized some of the names: Lord Thomas Storm, Lord Hale Murden, Lord Derek Stonebow. Others were unfamiliar: Richard Benjamin Catpad. Solomon stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "I am writing to the lords to inform them of your father's passing and to prepare for your brother's coronation," he said, his tone measured and calm. The words hit Teresa like a blow. "Jason's coronation?" she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief and anger. "I am the eldest. The throne is mine by right." Solomon shook his head, his expression one of resigned patience. "Jason is the eldest son of King Otto. By the laws of our land, the throne passes to him. You are married to Ryan Gray. Your duty is to his house, not to the throne." A flash of anger crossed Teresa's face. She and Ryan had tried for years to have a child, but their efforts had been in vain. The pressure to produce an heir had only added to the strain on their marriage, and the failure to conceive had become a constant source of pain and frustration. "Jason is too young for such a burden," she argued, her voice pleading. "Let me rule in his place until he is older. Let Ryan and I guide the realm." Solomon shook his head again. "He will have me and his lords to guide him," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "The laws are clear, Teresa. The throne is Jason's by right." Teresa's eyes fell on one of the parchments on the desk, and she picked it up, scanning the words. "Sir Benjamin, I regret to inform you that our king has passed. You are no longer bound to your oath to watch over Richard. That time has now ended," she read aloud. "Who is Richard?" she demanded, looking up at her uncle. "None of your concern," Solomon said sharply, taking the letter from her hand. "There are matters you do not need to trouble yourself with." Teresa felt a surge of frustration and anger. She turned and left the study, her mind racing with thoughts of how to secure her claim to the throne. She walked the castle's stone hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Teresa wandered the corridors of the castle, lost in thought. The stone walls seemed to close in around her, and the faces of the servants and guards she passed were a blur. She needed a plan, a way to assert her claim and ensure that she, not Jason, would rule. She made her way to the castle gardens, a place of solace and reflection for her. The garden was a riot of colors and scents, even after the storm, with flowers and herbs thriving in the harsh desert climate. Teresa found a secluded bench and sat down, her mind racing. Her thoughts turned to the political alliances that had shaped her life. Her marriage to Ryan had been one such alliance, designed to strengthen the ties between their families. But now she needed to forge new alliances, to build a coalition of support among the lords and ladies of the realm. She thought of the lords her uncle had been writing to. Some of them might be persuaded to support her claim if she could offer them something in return. Power, influence, wealth, these were the currencies of the court, and she would need to use them to her advantage. As she sat there, she began to formulate a plan. She would start by reaching out to those lords who had been closest to her father, those who had fought alongside him and shared his vision for the kingdom. She would appeal to their loyalty and their sense of duty, reminding them of the sacrifices her father had made for the realm. Next, she would seek out those who had been marginalized or discontented under her father's rule. She would offer them a chance for greater influence and power in exchange for their support. She would need to be careful, though, to ensure that she did not overpromise or create new enemies in the process. Finally, she would need to confront her uncle. Solomon was a formidable opponent, and she would need to be strategic in her approach. She could not afford to alienate him completely, but neither could she allow him to undermine her claim. With these thoughts in mind, Teresa rose from the bench and made her way back to the castle. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but she was determined to succeed. One way or another, she would rule.